Hi, and welcome to Wait, Hold Up, What, a podcast from the Women that Eliminate Girl Hate. I am your host, Dawn Hanks, and today I'm really excited to talk about the episode that we just did. It's with my friend Jennifer Sandifer, or as I refer to her, Jennifer Linz, and she works in the tech space as a senior partner marketing manager. And when we were coming up with the title of this podcast, it was, look, we really need this account, just play along. Because I cannot tell you how many times I have heard that exact phrasing said to me in my career. And so when we were coming up with the title, I expressed a story about working in sales and, managing a West Coast territory. I was in a offsite with a customer of ours that was going to buy ad space, and we were in Mexico, and, they'd taken everybody out. So certainly there was alcohol involved, although it wasn't like a party. It was a dinner. It wasn't crazy. And as everybody had got back to the hotel and was sitting in the lobby, this man from this organization was quite old. And I don't mean that negatively, but it wasn't like someone my own age. It was definitely somebody very close to retirement. And he actually didn't say anything. He grabbed my foot. That's the truth. I was trying to think of some fancy thing that he said, but he didn't really say anything. He grabbed my foot. I was in like it's a short heel, nothing crazy. This girl's got bad feet. You can't get too crazy. Anyways, he grabbed my foot, he put it in his lap and started to rub himself with my foot and trying to take my shoe off, and then proceeded to tell everybody that he was a foot guy and that all he wanted to do was suck young women's toes. I am not making this up. I am not joking. And I really, quite frankly, did not know what to do with myself. I was pulling at my foot and trying to jerk it away, but he was very strong and he kept a hold of it. And luckily, it did not get to the point where he put my foot in his mouth. But I quickly got up and left the space. And the kind of secret part of this story, as if that wasn't gross enough, is as I went into my room, I was so scared that he was going to follow me to my room that I went pretty quickly and I used my key card to get into my room. And as I did that, I opened the door so quickly that it hit the inside door to the bathroom in my room, bounced back, hit me in the face, and gave me a black eye. So the next day when we go to breakfast, everybody is like, oh my gosh, what happened? We felt so bad for you last night, but we didn't know what to do. This was our boss. And I was like, oh, please, no, this man did not hit me. Nothing violent came after I went to my room. But that moment of them being uncomfortable for me, knowing that what had happened was wholly inappropriate, but no one said anything. And then their pure abject horror the next day that they could have been a bystander to violence, it frames things so interestingly to me. And so that is the basis and the structure of which we started this episode with Jennifer Sandifer talking about playing along because we need an account for our business. Enjoy the episode. How many times have you heard the words workplace and culture used together and found yourself rolling your eyes at the thought? Believe me, I'm with you. I'll be honest, as I record this, I just rolled my eyes. That's because the word culture has become homogenized in such a way that they actually had us believing ping pong tables and pizza were symbolic of a good place to work. COVID changed that. Remote work was a success in the eyes of many, and as such, our ideas of what constitutes a good workplace culture have changed, and it boils down to one crucial element: equity. Now, don't you roll your eyes again on me. It's true. The expectation of employees is that they have a work environment and culture that works for them, regardless of who they are. No more cookie cutter swag and Pizza Hut deliveries, mandatory after hours, happy hours, and all of the other things they do to make us feel like we're a family. This is especially true for women. Remote work gave many more hours in the day, the flexibility to feel more productive and present, and a choice in how and what style of work is best for who they are and what they do. This is at the core of what equity means, because the old way was made for one group of people. And this is where Eliminate Girl Hate comes in. We help create safe and equitable spaces for girls and women, and we help the companies that employ them be more profitable in the process. Not rolling your eyes anymore, are you? Check us out at eliminategirlhate.com. Use code WAITHOLDUPWHAT in your contact form for a free consultation call and see how we can help you and your business. We are sponsored by Epiphany Recording Studio. Creativity needs to flow freely if you want to reach that aha moment that we're all looking for. At Epiphany Recording Studio, their goal is to create space that takes full advantage of those moments. From podcast and video production to music creation, you get the support you need to create compelling stories with a competitive sound. Your ideas can flow freely because they partner with you free of judgment, ready to be vulnerable, do the work, and make your projects look and sound their best. So let Epiphany Recording Studio help you reach your artistic vision by visiting them today at epiphanyrecordingstudio.com. Tell them Dawn sent you. Have you ever dreamed of writing a book? I know I have. Or maybe, also like me, you've started a manuscript. Maybe you've started 10 and you've just never finished it, or never let anybody else read it, or never thought you could publish it. Wherever you are in the process, Jim Woods would like to help. Jim's a writer just like you, but he's also a coach who loves helping writers bring their books into the world and make them a reality. If you are like me, sometimes you need that push, a supportive but demanding cohort along the way to put your stories out into the world and keep you on track. Jim Woods is that cohort. Visit jimwoodswrites.com and click the Let's Chat button. Mention our podcast for a free clarity call and get your story out into the world because we need it. Hi, Jennifer. How are you today?
I'm good. How are you, Dawn?
I'm so great. As we were booking this, I wasn't actually sure whether to call you Jennifer Linz or Jennifer Sandifer. So for the listeners, Jennifer got married last year or the year before? 2 years ago?
A year and a half-ish ago. Yeah.
Oh, wow. Because August will be 2 years then.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. But you never changed your name in the context of which we knew each other. So I didn't know which to refer to you as.
Yeah. Legally, I haven't changed my name, but I'm sort of going by both right now.
I like it. It's a new modern world, right? Use as many names as you want or as few as you want. Like it's no big deal. Do you think your life has changed since getting married?
I think my life has changed not so much because of the piece of paper, but more everything else that happened at the same time. Mm-hmm. As you are so well aware, we're settled, we're moved in, we have a beautiful home. Yeah. Finally content.
Yes. You know what? Hold on to that. Yeah, I think it's so interesting how often we find ourselves in discontent that we almost don't recognize our content when it happens.
Yes.
And live in it a little bit, right? Because also the world tells us, keep going, look for bigger, look for better. And there's something really peaceful about being content and relishing in it for a little bit, despite what all the self-help books tell us. What I like to do is just do a little bit of introduction to get to know you and let the listeners get to know you. So the first thing that I will ask you is, what do you do for a living?
I am a senior partner marketing manager, and I work in the tech industry. Essentially, what I do is the co-marketing between major OEM laptop brands and businesses.
B2B.
B2B. Yeah. B2B.
Did you always want to be in tech, or was there something else you dreamed of doing when you were younger?
Honestly, what I dreamed of doing when I was younger was being a hairstylist.
Ooh.
Surprisingly enough.
Why that? What was it about being a hairstylist?
I just thought it seemed like so much fun and less like your typical day-to-day salon, more like hairstylists to the stars, like movie maybe. Growing up outside of Los Angeles, like that's very common, I think, to assume that you would just fall into that industry. Yeah, none of that happened, and none of it even happened. So
I like to remind people or tell people, or even sometimes in some of my work, I talk about how years ago, there was a LinkedIn survey that talked about what, like the 10 most frequent jobs people want to be when they're young.
Mm-hmm.
And so they did some survey. They asked all these people, what did you want to be when you grow up? And for the most part, it kind of sat into 10 things.
Oh,
And it was things like veterinarian, doctor, singer,
Sure.
actor, astronaut, policeman, fireman, teacher, like all the things we think we know. But then they asked in the survey how many people actually did what they wanted to do when they were a child. Like how many people actually made it happen for themselves.
right.
And the percentage was 8.9%
Wow.
of the people that they surveyed. And I always thought that was so fascinating. And look, there could be research study upon research study about why that is, right?
Sure.
What kids think of as jobs and what the actuality of jobs is so different. Dreams change as you know more, all those kinds of things. But I found it really interesting that there still was this percentage of people that was like, hey, I'm 2 and I know I want to be a teacher and I'm going to do it, right?
Wow.
It's like the Beyoncés of the world that know what they want to be and what they want to do right away.
Yeah.
And the rest of us are kind of like, I don't know, maybe this, right?
Whatever the
So,
is.
yeah, whatever's going to pay my bills. What helped you find your way into technology?
Surprisingly enough, I sort of grew up in the aviation industry. So by way of temp agency. And then from there, I had moved to Washington for work with an aircraft company. And Cisco actually recruited me into tech as sort of a sales function. And it just grew from there. So happy accidents, both of my major career paths.
So you like it?
I do.
Like technology is interesting to you. And it's an industry that's obviously male dominated, as many industries are. Has that been a challenge for you, or early on in your career, was it uncomfortable being one of the only women, or were there a lot of women around you?
I certainly came across more issues early on in my career in the aviation industry than I have recently, probably mostly because I have been remote working for a majority of my time in the tech industry. But in aviation, very heavily male-dominated, old boys club. I was lucky to be surrounded by some females, particularly one female mentor who was my boss at the time. So that was wonderful. But I can't even express how many awkward situations I've come across, especially always being in the sales and marketing or business development roles early on in my career. It was wild.
So let's go back a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it would be interesting to talk about that in different ways. So how old were you when you really started in the aviation industry?
21.
Would that have at that time been considered young in the industry as well?
Yeah. At minimum, probably 10 to 15 years too young.
Okay.
Or younger than the average.
Too young is relative. Yeah, there you go.
Average, everyone was at minimum in their early to mid 30s.
And let's think about the first 3 to 6 months that you worked there. Were you keenly aware that you were a unicorn in the aviation industry because you were a woman? Or did you feel pressure?
The first 3 to 6 months, but within the first year, it became very apparent. Once I started traveling for work and I was always the youngest in my company, but it was a small company, so it wasn't really that big of a deal. We were all pretty close knit, but once I started traveling for the company and moved more into a business development role than a support role, yes, painfully obvious.
Does that mean that you noticed it more from external people from your company than internal people?
I did, yeah.
Okay. And did you notice a change in the internal people when on the road?
Very much so.
Okay, the rules change, right?
Yes.
Okay, so before we go to that, because I can only imagine, right? I also had a job young in a male-dominated industry, and there were some significant differences and how I felt about the work when I started traveling. So I think we can have some really good dialogue around that. But before we get there, that is like how people treat you. That's the interactions you have. Those are the things you experience. But when you're in the office in the beginning, did you feel any pressure to maybe conform, to act like one of the boys and fit in? Number one, because you're a woman, but number two, because you were younger. And what did that look like for you? Like, how did you try to do that? Or what did you think you needed to do that?
Yes. Throughout various points early on in my career, I was brought to take golf lessons in order to conform.
Brought to?
Yes.
Is that a boss?
Yes. Yes. So I had a leader whom actually I really adore, and I enjoyed my time immensely doing that with him. But that was definitely expected of me because I didn't play golf. I hate golf. But it was expected of me to be able to golf so that I could golf at all of the golf tournaments that were happening for these events.
Is this 20 years ago?
Almost.
We're talking about early 2000s?
Yeah. Mid
Okay.
to late 2000s.
Okay.
Like 2008 and later. Also, in addition to that, there were times where our company was on the verge of going out of business. And so I felt the pressure of you do what you got to do because we need the customers. So by whatever, by whatever means necessary, essentially.
And did you feel like that the means that was necessary was different for you? Or did you feel like that pressure was on everybody?
I'd say it was both, but on more than one occasion, I've had someone say, "Your business development, you're the one who puts the food on the table."
Fair.
There was a fair amount of pressure on everybody, but I probably maybe took it most to heart because I was the one who was responsible for bringing in new customers and expanding relationships.
Okay. So you're 21 years old. You enter the workforce. From a corporate perspective, I'm assuming that you did other work before. Maybe you waited tables, retail, all those fun kind of things. When you grew up, did your mother work?
No, she was a stay-at-home mom until about the time I was in high school, but then she started working for the schools.
Were there other women in your life that worked? Or what was it that made you think, I got to go out and get a career?
My parents have just always been very supportive. I wanted a career. I've never been the person who was like, oh, let's settle down and get married, have lots of babies. My mom always said it's best to be able to rely on yourself, even though she's happily married, and my dad has supported her and our whole family financially for our whole lives. But just smart thinking, have your own bank account and make your own money sort of thing. Because
did you ever ask her?
Is you.
Did you ever ask her why that was so important for her to teach you?
No, but that's...
Or have you since?
No, and I should, because my sister also is a flourishing career woman and also is married with children and is raising a family. So she's doing both. So I would love to have
it's interesting
with her. Yeah.
It's interesting to see why. I think it's with either parent. When a parent really pushes something on you, or it's a lesson they want you to learn, or parents will be like, hey, no matter what, don't let anybody tell you that you are not wonderful, or whatever it is that they tell you, right? There's normally something from their own life that is the causation of that, that says, okay, here's what and maybe it's a dream deferred, that they love their life, they're happy with the choices that they made, but there's some little thing back here that was like, I wanted to be a dancer, and what if that had happened?
And my mother had her own catering business.
Well, that's working.
Yeah, and this was before me, before me. Before she and my dad got married, she had her own catering business. In fact, I seem to recall my dad refused to propose to her until she was also getting her broker's license for something financial wise.
Sure.
Getting her broker's license, and he didn't want her to be distracted for excited for the wedding. So he waited until she knew that she passed the tests and got her license and everything. So she's always had a strong work ethic. But when I was born, she, and with my dad's support, chose to stay home with me.
It sounds like he, from the beginning, was a pretty supportive partner to her, whatever direction she wanted to go.
I do know, he had his own business when I was super little, and she helped with that. He had a payroll company, and they've told me stories of me in their office in a pack and play type of situation, So I know there was that, but then once he went off into the corporate la land, I think she stayed back.
But that kind of solidifies that from a very early age. You saw both parents working. You saw both parents in a partnership, right? Where there's give and take on both sides. And that probably influenced what you were looking for in your life as well, whether it be professional or personal in what you did.
Absolutely.
So you go in, and before you start traveling, I just like to ask people this because I'm curious. Yeah. Did you ever feel that you were asked to do things extra, whether it be in the office or take on some additional things because you were the woman that was in the office? So extra things could be, you're the one that plans the retirement party, or you're the one that picks up donuts in the morning, or you're the one they asked to take notes in a meeting. Did things like that happen for you?
Not in the beginning. I don't remember anything like that. Our office was sort of segregated, it was females in the cubicles for the most part. We did have one man who I'd totally forgotten about, and he was hysterical. And then all of the warehouse workers were men. So it was already set up like that, where all the women got everything done, and then the guys were doing the hard labor.
So did they ever, in reverse, were there ever things they helped you do? Because it was oh, let me get that for you, young lady, or all the time. Okay.
Moving stuff around. When I moved into an office versus a cube, they put everything up. Yeah.
Okay. How long into the role were you when you started traveling?
I'd say just under a year. Probably in that 10-month time.
And how soon after you started traveling did you start to feel uncomfortable?
The first day.
Okay. So tell me why, if you're comfortable with it. What was it? What was that first thing?
It may not have been the first one. So the first couple of trips I had, I really maybe felt more it was glamorous.
Of course.
As people often mistake work travel for. Don't get me wrong, it has its perks. And then you realize, and also being 21 or 22 by that point, how many hours you're expected to work, how many things you're expected to attend. 6 a.m. flights to get to a conference by noon, set up your booth, go to have the first whatever day, join the first networking party. And all of it was a lot of fun. I was also capable at that age, far more capable of the grind than I am today. And I didn't know any of the good tricks that I know today either, in terms of setting boundaries and.
Well, sure. We don't. Yeah. That's not part of the onboarding, right?
No, it is not. It should be, but it's not.
Had you traveled much before, just in your personal life?
Not really. I'd taken a trip here and there and family vacations, but nothing.
So it was also wow, I can't afford this meal in my personal life, so I better take advantage of everything that's happening on this trip because I don't know that I'm ever going to have this or be able to do this or experience that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
very relatable.
Yeah. The first major conference that I remember we had to go to a happy hour or whatever it was, some networking event in the hotel where the conference was being held. And I was just standing there talking, trying to meet and greet with people. And a man came up, said hello, etc. And the first question out of his mouth was asking me how many tattoos I have.
Was one of them visible?
Well, yeah. So
Okay.
I'm wearing long sleeves today, but I have, and at the time I had way less I do today.
Sure.
But my hair was up and the top that I was wearing had a V-neck, but then it also had this same shape in the back. So you could see a couple like from my back, and they're flowers. And I said I didn't know because I had never stopped to count them. I have many. And so he proceeded to start counting them, like 1, 2, 3, with his finger. And
did he touch you?
Yes.
Whoa.
And he like moved my top.
What?
See, because he could see that they kept going.
Wow.
And, I just sort of like, I don't know, probably 10. And just had my drink and tried to not call attention to the fact that I was uncomfortable because I took a look at his name badge and he worked for a Target customer. That was,
of course,
quite literally on my list of meetings for the following day.
Oh, wow.
That are like pre-set up. I'm like, this is what I'm here for. I'm here to network and I'm here to get new customers. So
yeah,
if that's what it takes, great. Okay, whatever. And then actually, funny enough, one of his colleagues came up and rescued me. And ultimately, the first guy, I don't want to say his name.
Of course.
The count, we'll call him the count. Ultimately, left his conversation or our conversation. And then the second guy was like, he's such a creep. I'll keep him at bay as much as I can, etc. But he is my boss. So I have to tread lightly there. And I was like, oh, fair enough. And I was like, oh, don't worry about it. I can handle myself. If I feel uncomfortable, I can, like, I don't need you,
Mm-hmm.
No, I was just lying through my teeth.
But okay. That's actually really interesting because there is this, I'm trying to think of the word for it. There's this kind of thing in our culture of the damsel in distress. In situations like this, oftentimes someone comes in to rescue you instead of stopping the person who is doing the wrongdoing. For one reason or another, I'm not demonizing anybody in that situation, right? It's uncomfortable for everybody in there. They're trying to figure out the way, but it tends to be about saving someone.
Yeah.
Other than about stopping bad behavior.
Yeah.
And maybe a little bit less so now than it was before. But if we can back up a second, it seems very obvious. You saw my facial reactions. For those that are listening, you probably couldn't see me. I'm an extremely animated person. And I looked at her and basically said, wait, hold up, what? Like, that's ridiculous, which is why we named the podcast this. But I think we should break down because some people might see that interaction as not that big of a deal. He's trying to spark up conversation. He sees something. Maybe he's a tattoo aficionado and has a bunch himself, and the conversation never got the chance to get there. At that moment, not with what you know now, okay? What about it was uncomfortable for you?
When he started counting physically with his hands, started counting. And I get it. Tattoos, they're a conversation piece.
Sure.
I would say.
But it was the fact that he touched you without permission or not in an environment where touch seemed appropriate.
Right. And if you could have seen it, I feel like you would have been like, oh, that's
Of course.
that's the way that someone who is intimately involved with another person would treat them.
And did it make you think that if that were allowed to proceed, something worse could happen? Did it trigger something in you that was like, hey, wait up, you're invading my space? It's one thing to say, yes, you should never touch another human being without their permission. Duh. But we also know a lot more today than we did then. And then I think as women, we weren't supposed to react to those things. It was like grin and bear it, or, oh, he doesn't mean anything bad. He's just a creepy old man, and that's what they do. He doesn't know any better, right?
Yeah.
But how did you feel in that moment? Were you scared? Were you annoyed? Were you pissed off? Were you like, wait, what's about to happen?
I was a lot of things. I was grossed out, I think, first and foremost. I was just like, ew. It's ew. What are you doing? You could be my dad, was my first reaction. And then, it sort of brings up old memories, kind of blindside you, things that you don't really want to, well, certainly things you don't want to remember at a networking event for your first major conference where you're trying to land a deal,
Of course.
And I had a relationship where it had nothing to do with the tattoos, but it was the touching that you weren't expecting. And it's okay. It's just,
it's not a big deal.
Not a big deal. And then it progresses. And then all of a sudden you're lying flat on your back and disassociating. So I can't say that I expected anything like that from him, because we were in a professional setting and I had really hoped, and I was there with a lot of people that I trusted. I had really hoped that someone would stop anything before it started. But
of course,
I was also standing right there with all of those people that I trusted who witnessed everything and asked me about it later, but also didn't do anything to stop his behavior
in the moment. So the first thing I want to say is, I'm really sorry that happened to you. It's an unfortunate, not just that moment with the tattoos, but also the memories that it triggered. It's very common in this world for women to have some sort of experience with that. Physical abuse, assault, sexual abuse, assault, and just violations of our body, right? Historically, our bodies have not really been our own. We've been treated as property, and in some cases, actually legally considered property in a lot of ways until very modern times. And so I think a lot of women have that. And I love that you used the word disassociate, because for so much of history, it didn't matter that it was a violation, right?
Yeah.
In some ways, it was our fault. What were we doing to get that behavior directed towards us? And so the only thing to do is disassociate and then blow it off or work off. But in this particular situation, I wonder too if there's an element of safety being in your body or your humanity, your skin, that even in this professional work setting, this isn't a date, this isn't a bar, it's not a club, right? It's a professional work setting, and still somebody's first thing to think about you is sexualized or violation, or that they have free range over being able to touch and do whatever they want with you. Does that resonate a little bit?
Absolutely.
Do you then go back to your hotel room that night and think, okay, I didn't like that. I don't want that to happen again. Let me strategize on a way to make it so that it doesn't? Or did you just be like, okay, tomorrow's another day?
So it's kept going. So later on in the evening, a bunch of us were sitting around a table as the event was wrapping up. And he, of course, a seat opened up right next to me and he sat down and then put his hand on my leg. And thank God I was wearing jeans.
Pants.
I remember thinking like, this is why I don't wear skirt dresses, because like full Um,
For
but
those of you For
but
those of you that didn't fully understand that sound effect, it also came with a slight viewpoint of gagging,
yes,
just to give everybody in the know.
yeah, that visual. And he just flat out asked me if I wanted to go back with him to his room. Just in like it was part of our normal conversation. And I had multiple people look and be like, did that really just happen? It took that bluntness for anyone else to recognize that I had been dealing with this all night.
And did someone in that moment say something to him, to you, or anything?
A friend of mine he stepped in and said, oh, I already told her I would take her back to her hotel. We're wrapping up for the night. And like he was like, okay, come on, let's go. And the guy got upset. But anyway, so my trusted friend took me back to my hotel. You know, it's like 1 a.m. in the middle of a city that I've never been to. And I had a 3-block walk, I think. So he walked me back, and he was staying at the hotel where the event was happening. So that was nice. He walked back, made sure I was safe, got home. And then I remember thinking like, did all of those things just happen? And is this normal? Am I supposed to just go with that? Should I have said yes? No, there's no way. But I caused a scene as he got upset, and people were looking, and he's in a leadership position at a major customer, but I had to buck it up or suck it up, and I had to go to my meeting with him the following day.
Did you tell a supervisor or a boss what had happened?
She was there. We shared it.
So she saw it.
She saw it. Yeah.
Did she ever mention it to you?
Yes and no. We didn't talk about it directly. And in her defense, she was relatively preoccupied with her own conversations for most of the evening. But when we got back a couple days later, my boss's boss, she was having an absolute hissy fit, like freaking out, yelling, and came out into the bullpen and called me in. And I was like, what happened? And like, what is going on? And she said, I just got off the phone with someone who accused my employees of promiscuous activity and accused you of inviting multiple men back to your room and da 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 da. She wouldn't even let me talk. Luckily, my direct boss said, that's absolutely ridiculous, because we shared a room, first of all. So that didn't happen because she was there. But second of all, no, just no.
Yeah.
And then proceeded to, she never really listened to my story because I never had the chance to even tell her what happened, but sent me back out and then immediately came back out with a form for everyone to fill out about a traveling code of conduct.
So I'm laughing because it is interesting to me how many similarities there are in people's experiences as I go through and I do interviews like this, or I work with other women, or I manage other women, right?
Mm-hmm.
You really start to hear some cohesiveness in their stories. You start to see similarities, right? They may not be the exact same scenario, but the similarities that are the most prevalent to me are in the way that they are handled. And we live in a world where women are often blamed for the actions of others. Mm-hmm. And that's what this sounds like. I was doing some free writing the other day, and it's like on this concept of women and girls are expected to be pretty. It's ingrained in us as well. So I'm not demonizing everything, but there's this idea that your value comes in part from your looks, right? And what those looks convey. And yet, if those looks then cause somebody to violate us, it is our fault. So we're supposed to be pretty, but not too pretty. And you should take care of yourself, but not be vain. And all of these kind of conflicting or hypocritical ideals of what we're supposed to do. Where it becomes even more interesting for me is when it is women who perpetrate that with other women, right? And historically, there are some reasons behind that as far as like the competition. There weren't a lot of spaces for women. So it was, I'm not, if there's an open job, maybe there's 5 of them. We're going to be lucky if a woman gets 1 of them. So I'm not competing for 5 roles. I'm competing for 1 role against the other women. It wasn't even about competing with men. And so oftentimes, especially back in the day, if you will, you had female supervisors that didn't maybe know how to navigate that in being part of the boys' club, especially in leadership. The only way to get there was to play along. And so probably had her own trauma or her own scenarios that happened that she dealt with. But then you resign yourself to saying, this is part of the game and I want to play the game, right? And so you push things aside. You obviously rebounded. You stayed in the industry and you moved on to tech, which is also male dominated and kind of the same type of environment in some ways. I have never worked in aviation, but I have worked in tech, and I can imagine the similarities that you and I have talked before. So how do you rebound from something like that? And do you feel a responsibility to act differently to prevent that from happening in the future? And what does that look like for you?
At the time, I struggled really hard with it. It took me multiple similar experiences and years of just learning and just honestly growing and maturing to understand that I do have my own voice and that I don't need to be a quote booth babe in order to be successful in my career.
I want to stop you right there. I don't want to interrupt you, but I do want to interrupt you. For those people not in a corporate environment, I want to discuss booth babes with you.
Yeah.
So oftentimes at trade shows in corporate settings, there's this real sexualized environment at trade shows. And it isn't just these types of experiences that Jen had where somebody feels more agency with you than they should is not knowing you. But it's also that environment. Most of the entertainment tends to be scantily clad, I believe is the word for half naked. And there tend to be women who walk around passing out tchotchke or freebies or coupons, flyers, come to our booth. It's if you've ever been to Las Vegas and you're walking down the strip in Las Vegas and you hear this, "Ay, mommy, right? And they're passing out flyers to you and you like can't help but grab it because they don't really give you a choice. And please apologize for my tisking and representation of what that is like. But if you've been to Vegas, I feel like I was pretty on. But that happens in a trade show. And then oftentimes vendors, companies, brands will actually hire female models, but not in suits like everybody else is required to wear at these trade shows or polos and buttons up and business attire. But they will be in booty shorts and crop tops or bathing suits. And you're sitting there in an aviation industry or tech industry going, I don't really understand the correlation between this. Like, why is this happening? But there's another element to booth babes that happens, especially when you're young, is you work for a company. And even though your job is the same as your male counterparts or maybe even higher, people reference you as a booth babe. They treat you as a quote unquote booth babe, right? And it's in this very menial and condescending way that kind of happens at these events. And it's just universally accepted that this is how you sell a product, right? You got to sell it with sex. You got to sell it with skin. And nobody really wants to see men in that way. And so it's always women that do it. And so when you start off in your career, I had a team like this in the tech world where I had a bunch of younger women than myself. They were in their early to mid 20s. And we would go to events and our own sales team would reference them as booth babes. And I had to explain to them, well, hold on a second. Yes, they are attractive women. Yes, they are young, but they actually planned, coordinated, strategized, executed this very event that is earning our brand millions of dollars. They are smart and savvy, and we are not going to reference them as booth babes. I said it in a sales meeting that you will not disrespect this team in this way because, again, nothing wrong with being a model. Nothing wrong with any way in which you choose to make a dollar.
No, not at all.
For me, the issue is that when you label it in that way and when you reference it in that way and you include this condescension or this holier than now attitude over what you do versus what they do, it's wholly inappropriate. It's very unkind. And it shows that you have no idea what goes into the jobs that these people do. So it's disrespectful. And I think that's an important thing to talk about because a lot of us, when we're young, it's just, why are you so mad? Like, we're basically calling you hot.
Right.
And so I just wanted to put that in the lexicon because you mentioned booth babes, and that's a real big trigger for me. Like, it just irks me so much because it is a way to demean a young woman in a role that she's working really hard to go into. And again, it's also demeaning to the women. If you want to wear that outfit, shake your ass, and promote products, get it. Like,
get it.
Dude, I kind of wish at some point at 21, with the body that I had, that I had done a little bit more of that kind of thing, right? Because there's so much negativity we put on our own selves. Like, I'm not cute enough to do that, or I'm not confident enough to do that. Do whatever you want. But that doesn't mean you're a piece of meat. It doesn't mean all of these things that get implied in these situations. And that just sucks.
Yeah.
It just really sucks.
Yeah.
And so I wanted to make people aware of what a booth babe was and why it is so irking. And that was probably a tangent that didn't need to happen, but
it did.
You know, that's what editing is for.
I think it's really important to point out because there were, especially when I had lost weight, so I was in the best shape of my life, there were many times where men thought that they were complimenting me by calling me the booth babe, like you said.
Yeah.
There were many times where they were confused and thought that I was just the hired girl, local girl for the trade show to check people in and show you to your meeting. I'm like, no, I'm the director of business development. Your meeting is with me.
You mentioned losing weight, and that's such a thing in society. Okay, you lose weight and all of a sudden you're getting unwanted attention.
Yeah. Even more.
Does it make you question whether or not, I don't even know how to ask that question properly, but like, I lost all this weight, but now I'm getting attention I don't want. So maybe I should gain it back.
Yeah, I think about that frequently. It's proven. So I've been told. I don't know. I haven't done the research myself. But so I've been told it's proven that more beautiful, more attractive people do better in their careers. And especially if you're in a sales position. And I would say that was true for my own self when I was, and I think a lot goes into that, not necessarily just the attractiveness, but your confidence level often goes up. And so you're better at sales.
And it's European beauty standards, right? So it's beauty is subjective, but in this context, we're talking about this idealized view of attractiveness.
Right. So to be thought of in that way is sort of a kind of a torn reaction.
You're like conflicted about it, right?
This because this is gross, but also I'm like kicking ass and taking names professionally. So maybe I do, but on the other hand, it was very conflicting. Very conflicting.
Do you think some of that is in please? I want to be as sensitive and as I can in this situation. So. Whatever. But do you also think that some of that then goes back to the triggers that we talked about earlier about the agency of your own body and someone violating you. It's like, I want to be attractive and feel like I'm at my best. But when I do that, I cannot control what other people are doing with me and around me.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay, so now you're at the age that you are, you have some time in a career, you have the knowledge and the, some might say, sanity that comes with age, right? The lessons that come with age. Do you feel better equipped to handle inappropriate situations than you were before? Is it still an uncomfortable thing that you're not 100% sure how to handle?
It's still uncomfortable for me. I say I feel better equipped in that I know what I would want to say, but when I'm put into the actual situation, I'm often not able to say what I want to say. Recently,
because of what?
I get flustered. I just get flustered. And an example was last year, I was in a call and we were talking about like a program that me and a colleague had worked really hard on. And I was so offended by what these guys were saying. You and I both put blood, sweat, and tears, actual blood, actual sweat, and actual tears. You more than anyone. And to just have it diminished to this little thing. I don't even know. I'm not explaining it well, but the point is that I got upset and I was mad. I wasn't like, oh, you hurt my feelings. I was like pissed off on behalf of you, on behalf of me, on behalf of the work that we had done, the whole team, everyone that was part of it.
And you felt confident in the work, right?
I did. I was absolutely confident. What I wasn't confident in, and which I had expressed, was that we weren't able to deliver our product in the way that we wanted to because we ran out of time. That's simply what it came down to. And I started crying on the call because I was so mad. And when I'm mad, I cry. I don't scream. I don't yell. It just comes out of my eyes. I don't know. And then on top of that, we had a leader that said, well, I know she's a little bit emotional. And I was just like, first of all, yeah, I'm fucking emotional. Because you just shat on an entire year's worth of work and torture, frankly, that we had gone through.
Yeah.
I mean, that affected both of us, but mostly you. Both of us. Like, immensely.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then, thanks for pointing that out. And there's nothing wrong with being emotional. But if I were a man, that wouldn't have been the reaction.
And it's so interesting because it's also about how you define emotional. I've been in a lot of conference rooms and conference calls and meetings where men argue quite loudly. It's elevated. They name call. They curse in the meetings. They throw people under the bus. And none of that is considered emotional.
Yeah. None of it's emotional.
Right?
Certainly no one would ever say you're emotional.
Or that you're being inappropriate for a business setting. Yes. But for some reason, tears imply that.
Yeah.
And I am also, you know this, but for all of you lovely people meeting me for the first time, I am a crier. I embarrassingly cried in front of the checker at the grocery store the other day. And the chiropractor and the person scheduling my chiropractic appointment. It's not always the most convenient thing, but it is something that happens. And it is for the same reason you said. I'm not sad. I'm angry and I do not know how to express anger. And a lot of that stems from our childhood because as girls, we are told that we are not allowed to be angry. We should not be competitive. I was telling someone the other day, my least favorite word in the English dictionary, besides the word moist, which many people do not like, is the word too, T-O-O. because I think it is exponentially used with women than it is with any other being on this planet or people who identify as women, right? We are too emotional. If we're not too emotional, we're not emotional enough. If we're too sensitive, we're too prude, we're too sexual, we're too aggressive, we're too timid. So no matter what we do, it's always too much of that. It can't just be. And the other thing about that in your situation in this call is it's an inappropriate response. Mm-hmm. If we want to be empathetic leaders, if we want people to flourish, to succeed in a business setting, it is to allow space for them to care about the work that they do. Mm-hmm. And oftentimes, and in your case, you said it yourself, I worked a year on this, right? I did my best or my hardest work. I cared about what I was doing. I put the blood, sweat, and tears in it, not because I'm a robot, but because I care about the results and the quality of my work. That's what you should want as a leader, is somebody who cares so much about that work that they might get, quote unquote, emotional about it, right? Because it means that they want to make themselves proud. Want you to be proud. They want the business to succeed. They care about it, and they're all in. Mm-hmm. And not allowing space for that moment. In that moment, saying something like, wow, I can see that really struck a nerve with you. Mm-hmm. And I want to allow space for that. Mm-hmm. Is there something I said to upset you? Mm-hmm. Or can you tell me why you're upset? Yeah. Even just that question. I would ask that same question to a man who's yelling and cursing. Mm-hmm. I'd like to back up a minute. This seems like this is upsetting you. Can you tell me why or make me understand why this is the reaction we're having? Because I want to make sure we're all good. Mm-hmm. We all feel safe. We all feel heard, seen, right? Respected in that space. And to just go, she's a little emotional now, right? Guys, don't worry, whatever. Yeah. It doesn't allow space for that. Yeah. And then it creates an environment where you can't be authentic. You can't speak up with your opinion and say, I disagree. And then what that does, which is the bane of my existence, is creates homogenous environments where you have yes people, where you have one opinion that matters. There's no diversity of thought. So we talk a lot about diversity, or I do, because I really love the topic of DEI or DEIJ, which is diversity, equity, inclusion, and justice. For those of you who are unfamiliar, it's a subject matter that means a lot to me and that I care about. I wish I could tell you what Enneagram I am, because people love that and they can be like, or I'm an Aries, if that matters. But I feel strongly about judiciousness and fairness and equity. And we think about diversity and equity in terms of race and gender and sexual orientation or religion, all these different labels that we put on diversity. But it's so much deeper than that. It's about diversity of thought and allowing different voices in the room, because ultimately in any business, you're creating some version of a product, right? Now, some of those products are a thing you can hold in your hand, a shoe, a piece of apparel, whatever. Mm-hmm. Some of them, more of them nowadays, are things like SaaS, which is software as a service, or some sort of service element to it. But either way, it's a product. And anytime you put a product into the world, there are 1,000,001 different type of people that are going to consume that product. Mm-hmm. And therefore, you have to be able to anticipate and understand the needs of 1,000,001 people. Yeah. Not you and your twin brother. And therefore, if you don't have other opinions in the room, you may miss something that wasn't what you thought, right? Or wasn't the first thing, because that's not your experiences. And we all bring with us a unique set of experiences. If we go back to your initial story, you had a past experience that triggered in your mind to get the reaction that it got. Someone else might have a different experience that says, touch every tattoo you want, right? But it is about understanding and reading the room, reading the people, and asking for permission to invade somebody, whether it be their physical space, their emotional space, their intellectual space. It is about agency and allowing people to have agency. And when you dismiss a comment or a reaction like that in a meeting, it is dismissing your agency. And so again, I'm so sorry that happened. I'm sorry it happened in an environment in which I was somehow linked to, if that makes sense. Not that I'm saying it's my fault. That's not what I mean by that. But and the apology is not because I'm apologizing for something I did.
No.
It's to honor the fact that you were put in a position you shouldn't have been put in. And I know what that feels like. And I want you to know that I know that that feels like shit, right? And so I would never want you to do that. And that's the respect and love I have for you, but because I know you, but it also would be for any human being. I would never want them to feel that way.
And I think the worst part was the self-anger that I had for having that reaction.
Put words to that.
Did I have to cry on camera during a meeting? Why couldn't I just say what I was thinking in my brain, take the tears out of it, and continue on with my day? But instead, I had to cry, which the tears were what became the emotional part of it. And then I had to turn off my camera. And frankly, I had to stop caring. I had to stop caring because it was too much.
I get that. I totally get that.
And that's very against my nature. I don't.
Do you still feel that way?
I go back and forth, but I care less and less.
In recent months and years, I've really been learning how to reframe things. I could probably talk about 500 hours on this subject matter, but I am a lover of storytelling. I believe I think it could be a Walt Disney quote, but then someone I know in my life, my coach and a friend by the name of Harris III, he says it a lot, that storytellers are the architects of culture. And if we're going to change anything in the world, it is through storytelling. And that's why I'm doing this. That's why I have the business that I own. And I do believe they have the ability to create compassion and empathy for other people and understanding. But in this process of reframing things, I realized that storytelling goes two ways. And we have, from our experiences, especially as children, but from our traumatic experiences, we develop narratives about ourselves. And we don't even really, it's not conscious, but then everything thereafter comes out of this narrative we tell ourselves, right? And throughout my life, because I am and have, I think for the most part, always been pretty emotional, it's always been discussed as a negative. So it's like, oh, there she goes again. When I was younger, my siblings, who were very much younger than me and didn't know what this, not what it meant, but they didn't know that it might not be very sensitive.
Yeah.
They would be like, oh, get the bucket. Dawn's crying again. And I'd be like, what's wrong with it? And my reframing now is, wait, when did we decide that was wrong? When did we decide that I'm the weird one because I'm in touch with my emotions and you're the normal one because you're just a piece of rock and you have no emotions and you're dead inside? And I get there's a lot of layers in between, right? But just go both sides. Like, when did we decide that? Because I'm going to change that narrative right now for myself. I think it's weird that you don't cry. I think it's weird that this doesn't bother you. I think it's weird that you think it is appropriate to dismiss and condescend me in a meeting. And I'm not going to yell about it. I'm not going to get upset with you. But I'm also not going to internalize that and shame myself for having what is a completely natural and human reaction. And do I wish it happened in more convenient times?
Sure.
I do. So universe, if you're listening,
right,
there you go.
Please stop.
But I also,
the checker.
Exactly. But I had an experience with my nephew recently in November. And We were in California. It was a family trip. We were all out there. And there's 3 boys. Boys can get rambunctious. Something happened. I did not see it. And my nephew left the room crying by himself. And his parents were not there. And I was about to leave to join them to play pickleball, America's fastest growing sport. Had never done it before or since, but, did it. So I'm super cool. And the other family members that were left behind, my nephew didn't know as well. They live in California, so he's not around them as much. And so they were like, hey, Dawn, can you go check on him? And so I went into the room and he was just a wreck. He was crying and he was very upset. And first of all, I'm an auntie who is, what happened? Who do I have to go after? Right? But I humbled myself a little bit and I was like, sweetie, what's wrong? And he just fell into my arms and I sat on the floor and he's crying and he's hugging me and I'm hugging him. And I was like, it's okay. You can cry. I was like, but can you tell me what happened? And at the time he shook his head no. And I was like, that's okay. If what you need to do right now is cry, that's okay. It's good to cry. It helps get it out. And oftentimes it makes you feel better afterwards. I was like, I was just reading about this from doctors that you feel better after you cry. So it's healthy. And he is snuggled up to my chest and he literally took his head back and looked at me in a way that was like, you're not going to tell me to stop crying? Like, it was such a moment of recognition. And for me, it was something I put in the back of my head. And I was like, I got to explore that later. And, he slowed down. And I said, the other thing that helps people sometimes is when they talk about it with somebody they trust. And so he did not talk immediately. He started to pantomime what happened. And at first I didn't know what was happening. And I was like, wait, what's going on? And then I saw it and I was like, oh, you got hit. And he shook his head, yes. I was like, oh, I'm so sorry. And then slowly he started talking about it. And we had a dialogue about it. And I said to him afterwards, thank you so much for telling me what happened and trusting me. And thank you for trusting me to cry in front of me. And I said, that's okay. And I said, I have to go. I'm supposed to meet your mom and dad. And he was like, please don't go. And I was like, sweetie, I need to because I promised them and they'll be looking for me. But it's okay. There are other people here that love you and that will be okay. So if it's okay with you, I'd like to tell your Aunt Amber what happened so she knows and she can make sure. I won't tell her who did it. I won't tell her what we talked about in here, but just so she can be on the lookout in case anything happens. And what I want to ask you is if that's okay, stay in here as long as you need. Cry, do whatever you need. But when you feel a little bit better, I want you to promise me that you're going to go out in the living room with everybody else. And I said, if you don't want to play with the person that hurt you, you don't have to. But I want you to, these people love you. They don't get to see you very often. So go out there. And that is what he did. I found out he sat close to my aunt for that entire time until the rest of us that he was more familiar with came out and all of that. But I remember leaving. I'm not a parent. I have no idea if that was the right thing to do, the wrong thing to do, or just one way to do it. I imagine that's the struggle parents have, right? But especially if you're not used to being around kids all the time. But what I did think about that night and sit on was the fact that was probably what I needed. And it was more about making somebody feel safe and not blaming them for reacting to something. So often we tell kids, don't cry, clean it up, especially boy kids, right? And it was what I would have wanted. And it's just permission to feel what you're feeling. And we don't do that at work, right? We don't give permission to people to be upset. We don't give them permission to fail. And I do think it is more prevalent with women because it's not a emotion as described by other people is not comfortable for a lot. That's why we apologize when we cry all the time. Or when we cry at all, we always apologize. It's automatic. So I did a reframing and I now say, because it isn't innate for me, if I start crying, I immediately apologize. Like the second I cry, maybe a tear hasn't even fallen, but my voice cracked. And I'm like, I'm so sorry. But now, especially with people I love and that know me, I preface it. I'm actually not sorry. but I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Right? This is an emotion that I'm not sorry for having, but I apologize that I need a minute to be able to communicate appropriately. Or I'm not sad, I'm overwhelmed.
Mm-hmm.
This is the emotion that's coming out,
Mm-hmm.
so that they know why, instead of them diagnosing me in the moment and saying, you're so emotional. It's no, let me tell you what's happening right now. I'm overwhelmed. I need to process. I will be fine in 3.5 minutes.
Right. Yeah.
And it has helped me feel less embarrassed or ashamed of that emotionality. I haven't done it in a professional setting yet, so that would be interesting. But okay, before we wrap this up, I first want to tell you I love you. Jennifer and I, if you couldn't tell from the conversation, we had worked together at one point and have never actually met in person.
No.
Have only seen each other on camera, but really, I feel, correct me if I'm wrong, but really developed a kinship or a bond or an affinity for each other.
Yes.
We talked a lot daily for 18 months, maybe more than you traditionally do with coworkers because we were remote. And in that, there's a big hole in my daily life not having them. So I want you to know how much I appreciate you for that. And I appreciate you supporting and cheering me on in this endeavor and being willing to show up and share some personal things with us, because I think that's an act of bravery. It's an act of friendship and support, and all of those things I don't take lightly. So I do want to say thank you for that and ask you if there's anything you feel inclined to say to people before we leave. And it's okay if the answer is no.
I want to point out that at whatever stage in your career that you are, it's okay to be in that stage. It's okay to be new and not know things. And it's okay to be in your second career path and know a lot of things and still be learning. And one thing that I've thought a lot about over just these experiences that I've had is hindsight's 2020. I wish I really knew that. Well, yeah, of course I wish I really knew that, but not that I'm happy I went through any of these experiences, but
you wouldn't be who you are.
They're part of, who I am.
All right. Thank you. Love you.
Mm-hmm.
Hi, everyone, and welcome to the closing statements for this episode of the podcast. You know, we talked to Jennifer Sandifer, and she was very, very vulnerable and honest about an experience early in her career in which somebody was inappropriate, both verbally and somewhat physically with her. Not somewhat, actually physically inappropriate with her. And being a young person and trying to understand that and know what that means or what to do with that. And it's a really interesting conversation because I don't think it's unusual. I think it's pretty common, not just early in your career, but mid and end of your career. It just manifests in different ways. I think when you're younger, oftentimes, you know, people think, oh, they're not going to know, so I can get away with more. And sometimes as you age, they think, oh, you're impossible. You know, relax, get over it. Like, it's no big deal. And so it is something I think that permeates. But one of the more interesting parts of the conversation to me was when we talked about how our looks and our weight and these societal expectations of how we look play into that. And Jennifer had mentioned, you know, that she had heard it somewhere, but she wasn't sure if it was true that, you know, the more attractive you are, the more opportunities you have in your career, the more money you make. And so I wanted to be able to support that. In doing some research, there is an article out of the University of Buffalo, dated towards the end of 2021, in which they talk about that, yes, there is research that shows that, quote unquote, beautiful people are more likely to get hired, receive better performance evaluations, get paid more. But one of the correlations that they drew with this is that it wasn't just that they were good looking, but it was about how they navigated the world as a good looking person and how they developed specific traits and considerations based on how people responded to their attractiveness. They were able to build and gain a greater sense of power and have more opportunities to improve their nonverbal communication skills throughout their lives. And which I found super interesting because, in case you haven't been able to discern this from any of the episodes you've listened to, I over explain myself all the time. And I do that in part because I'm not sure if people are listening or hearing me, or I don't feel seen. And a lot of that does come from some insecurities from my looks, being a young person. I grew up with an illness that affected my skin, and it would go into remission and come out of remission and so forth. But a lot of times it was on my face. And so I was called so many names from an early age, from Red Dawn, Bloody Dawn, Scabby Dawn. Some parents told their children they couldn't play with me because I was a dirty ragamuffin and look at me. And that's a direct quote from a mother of a fourth grade friend of mine. I had high school boys that said they would fuck me if I wore a paper bag over my head. And so my looks were always this really big insecurity of mine throughout most of my life. And not that most women don't have insecurities about their looks, I would point out. But I think they were just intensified because of this illness that I had and the inability to keep that illness under control. And so this idea that attractive people don't feel like they have to put as many words on it because they can use their nonverbal communication, I just thought that was super fascinating. Yeah, so that was a little bit of a fact check, not an official one, but the article was called Attractiveness Pays Off at Work, but there's a trick to level the playing field. And it was dated August 18th, 2021 for anybody who wants more information or to understand more about what that looks like. There's a lot of things I could say about this episode, but I just feel like it does a really good job of it on its own. And so I'm going to let it be at that. But we would love you to share your experiences. You can comment on our Instagram post for this episode. You can put comments in YouTube. You can send us some emails at info@eliminategirlhate and keep the conversation going. We'd love to hear from other people and their stories. And if you want us to share them with a wider audience, we're happy to do that. Just let us know in your correspondence with us. Thank you again for listening to women tell their stories and put the narrative out in the world and being able to control and own that narrative. And we hope you'll listen again to Wait, Hold Up, What?